really excited to have my next guest on the podcast. He's the Director of Operations at Swoop. Welcome to the podcast, Jimmy Dean Porter.
Hi, Joe. Great to be here with you. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely, the pleasure is mine. Let's just jump right into it. How about you let the listeners know who you are and what you do?
Sure, thanks. Appreciate that. My name is Jimmy Dean Porter. Yep, I'm the Director of Operations at Swoop. And Swoop is a wholly owned ULCC or ultra low cost carrier of WestJet Airlines. I am also in that role the Transport Canada Delegated Operations Manager, which means essentially that I am responsible for the operational functions and our safety management system and our airline operating certificate.
It's awesome. And I've been doing
Yeah.
some research on you before the interview, and I saw that you've worked at WestJet for over 18 years and had this amazing career. Perhaps you could let the listeners know how you got to where you are currently in your current
Sure.
role.
Thank you. Yeah, it has been an amazing career. Absolutely. No question. It's actually been quite an interesting and really unexpected path for me. Really just driven from a growth mindset and just throwing myself out there and always wanting to learn and grow. I guess I'm really never fully comfortable unless I'm uncomfortable. So, uh, I mean, going back, I graduated high school without a real clear path on what I wanted to do with my life. I went to Mount Royal College for a couple of years, taking a Bachelor of Commerce degree. I left there 2 years in to go work in my family business. My parents had a business in Chestermere, so they were expanding that. I took an opportunity to go work with them, and I really enjoyed what I was doing. I had some really good nascent lessons on leadership back then, and learning about structure, process, and discipline, and did that for about 5 years. By happenstance, ended up becoming a pilot. I took private pilot license lessons and just absolutely fell in love with it. So decided right then and there I wanted to do that for a career. It wasn't easy news to break to my parents after telling them I was going to take over their business, but they were supportive, of course, 100%. So I ended up actually getting into flying, and 27 years later, here I am. 20 years in the WestJet Group, as you mentioned there. So, and now an executive in the Swoop team here and running the operation. So adopted a philosophy, really the old adage of if it's terrifying and exciting, it's probably something you should pursue. So I've had some really amazing experiences over the years, specifically at WestJet in the last 20 years, whether that be recruiting pilots, training and checking pilots. I've done commercials with WestJet, believe it or not. Reintroduced the MAX that led to a spot on CBC News, the national with Ian Hannah Manson. That was a bit of a watershed moment for me there. Also, co-hosted our company management event with 800 plus people and really finished my role as the chief pilot at 737 there. So I think back, time goes quick. I just can't believe it, but it was a tremendous experience there, and I'm really learning a lot over here at Swoop as well so far.
Absolutely. I love that you say that just trying new things, you kind of fell into where you are today. I always like to say,
Yeah,
if it's not scary, you're not growing, you're
so
complacent.
true.
So you always have to try new things, and whether it's scary or not, it's always an avenue for growth.
For sure.
Speaking of Swoop, I think
Yeah.
most people may know that they're a ultra low fare carrier here in Canada.
Yeah.
But what's maybe something that most people wouldn't know about Swoop?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So Swoop is considered an ultra low cost carrier, and they're relatively new in the Canadian landscape. So there are some other competitors starting to start up in this space. They're starting to open up in this space. Really, the purpose of Swoop, our mission is to make travel accessible, really, and affordable and easy for Canadians. So we have costs that are traditionally 30% lower than most legacy carriers, and what we do is we pass those savings back to the traveler. So it's an unbundled model, and really what that means is that you spend where you want to spend. Really, you maybe be surprised to know our average fare for September was only $59, right? So essentially, what happens then is you get the ticket, you get a seat on the airplane, and then whatever matters to you is what you spend up to. So if you want to buy seat selection, an upgrade to a more legroom, onboard snacks, baggage, those are the sorts of things that people will pay for, and it just unbundles all that expense that a traditional airline ticket would include. And really, just we've got an amazing team of experienced professionals over there that it's just a real pleasure to work with.
Absolutely. I see you guys are always opening up new services between major centers, like recently with Edmonton and Ottawa. I also saw you guys won Airline of the Year, Edmonton International Airport from Travel Gurus. So definitely lots of accolades.
Yeah, great partnership with Edmonton and of course all of our airport partners. It's an exciting year for us. So I mean, obviously the pandemic was very difficult, but with with the opportunities coming out of that, we've added aircraft. We've got 13 now, 737s. 10 of those are the NG variant, but still a modern and fuel efficient airplane. And we're adding 6 of the MAX aircraft as well, which has a much nicer interior, better distance and more comfortable and quieter. It's a great airplane. So we'll have 2 of those coming in November to round out our fleet to 16. And yeah, we serve Canada, we serve the US and down to the Caribbean as well as Mexico. And exciting time for growth for that.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. You touched on the pandemic. I'm just curious, what sort of challenges are there within the industry?
Yeah, the airline industry is an interesting one, and you asked the challenge. It really changes daily. I mean, generally speaking, the biggest challenge with the airline industry as an operator is just such high, tremendously high, really capital costs. I mean, as you know, airplanes are very expensive. Everything comes at a premium. There's a considerable burn rate in our industry, and then you match that up against really a lot of high structural taxes and fees in the Canadian system comparatively to some other jurisdictions, and really strong competition drives sometimes irrational fare activity in the name of competition. And you wrap that all up with surging fuel prices as we're seeing now, and it's really difficult to continue to make a profit and grow. That being said, probably the most near-term challenge for us has been recovering from the pandemic, like I said. So, because of that high capital cost, it's really challenging for an airline to have to stand down a considerable portion of its fleet and its capacity. So it really did bring the airline industry to its knees, through that period. And as you saw, there was a lot of airlines just completely shut down. We chose not to in the WestJet group and in Swoop as well, but we grounded a lot of fleet. And then what happens, of course, is there's a lot of catch up that has to be done when you start to add capacity back in. So when we started to see demand surge, we wanted to immediately get those seats back into the market and help people travel to where they want to go. But of course, there's challenges in the industry when it comes to recruiting people again, when it comes to training, and then logistical challenges and airport challenges. It all led to a very frustrating summer, right? So we had probably industry wide about 20% too much capacity in the market. And you saw a lot of airlines canceling flights, and Swoop was no different. And it was really challenging and it was difficult. And we felt terrible for the travelers because they bought those seats expecting to go somewhere. And then we can't offer that service because people aren't trained up in the traditional timelines. And yeah, it was very difficult. So we took about 20% of our network out, as did a lot of the other carriers. And things stabilized a little bit later in the summer towards the end of August. And now just a lot more mindful going forward about ensuring you have the right capacity in the market to make sure you can meet that demand and honor your commitment to your travelers.
Yeah, I just want to ask you another question here, JD. What's a unique skill or skill set that's made you become so successful in your career?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I don't know if it's overly unique, but certainly something that has stuck with me, and I've tried to utilize as much as I can in my day to day work activities, and it's probably played a large part of my success, really. So, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a big podcast consumer, and one thing that I heard on a podcast that really stuck with me is something that I've deployed in my everyday life, and it's really to be successful and to be good at everything you do. The first thing to do is have a high standard and do good work, right? The second one is to get your work done on time. And the third one is really just be likable and somebody you'd like to work with or spend time with. And I think that even if you find that 2 out of 3, you can hit those marks on a regular basis, you'll probably do pretty well and consistently. If you don't, then you might have a little harder challenge out there. But really, just those 3 things have served me well. The second one being don't create your future from your past. I heard that once and it really stuck with me as well. So create your present from your future. And that always helps me to really focus around lead by beginning with the end in mind. And it usually helps a little bit to kind of frame your energy.
Absolutely. One thing
Yeah.
that always top of mind for me is how do you build that resilience in challenge? Like I
Mm.
always like to say, having that intestinal fortitude in times of rocky times. So for you yourself, like how do you, as a leader, how do you have that resilience?
Yeah, it's such a great question. It's something that But I've thought a lot about mental health and wellness is an area that's very important to me, and it's a key area of focus, especially as a leader, right? And something I ardently support. I think, when I think about resilience specifically, I think a lot about even just a quote from Viktor Frankl, right? Once said that when we're no longer able to change the situation, we're challenged to change ourselves. So I think about that, right? How do you take an external event and internalize it and figure out how to move forward throughout it, right? So really the last 8 months for me, when I look about I think about what I've gone through here at this time, at such a stressful time for the industry, at a carrier, at Swoop, that's 4 years old, and two of those have been through the pandemic, really bringing, a really challenging time, long hours, really a lot of pressure, imposter syndrome, right? An infinity pool of work and really just very few days from completely free from duty. And it really all adds up to a lot of stress, especially when you feel like you're responsible for people, right, in a leadership position. So add to that the family life impact. I mean, obviously my family's paid the price more so than I have even, right? In the fact I'm distracted and I'm not around as much, and I feel terrible about that. So as far as it comes down to resilience, I mean, there's certain jobs or periods in our life that are challenge us and that will challenge us in unimaginable ways, really. And I think that resilience is just that capacity to recover and really flex. So I think for me, what works well for me is really just, first of all, understanding that self-care isn't selfish, right? And you can't serve from an empty vessel, and you really need to start with a baseline, and that's your own mental health and wellness, and develop good rituals. So for me, I use an acronym that's widely well known. It's called SEEDS. So I need to get a proper amount of sleep every night. We don't always get it, of course, but it is top of mind. You need to get some exercise. You need to have a safe and comfortable environment, and an environment that supports your wellness. And then diet is important, as is probably almost the most important one aside from sleep, is stress management, right? So for me, I'm very mindful and deliberate about how I approach stress management. I breathe deep through the day. I take those movement moments, really manage my calendar forward, and try and forward plan as best I can to keep those that buffer of resilience up. And also just acknowledge when you're having those lows. Talk to people, right? I talk to my wife a lot about this. We share a lot of back and forth on how we're feeling day to day, and it's never perfect, but progress, not perfection, I guess, right?
Absolutely. I love that. Speaking of balancing work life, I have a pilot on the show, so I have to ask, what's been your favorite place to vacation at?
Boy, favorite vacation place has got to be for me Hawaii, and I think maybe it's just a personal connection because my parents traveled a bit when I was a child, and they took me over to Hawaii 3 times. I was very fortunate, and to be able to fly there as a pilot, as a professional, and to lay over there I was walking down the beach and just being in a place that I was when I was a teenager there with my parents brought back some very fond memories, and to be there as a professional doing it for a career and a layover, that was probably one of the hallmark moments. But certainly, I mean, how can you go wrong with Hawaii? It's a beautiful place.
Absolutely. I'm fortunate enough to be able to go there next February, so looking
Excellent.
forward to
Right on.
it. Speaking of highlights, we've talked a lot about challenges, but in terms of success, kind of on the other end of the spectrum, if you will, what does that mean to you personally?
Yeah, that's a success is unique, obviously, to each individual, and it's a really good question, and it's critical people ask themselves that question, right? I think that it's important that everyone understands what they're doing things for, right? And what's your value set? What matters to you? It's really easy to have moving goalposts, and I think that's good. It's important to continue to challenge yourself. Like I said, I think I've really never sat static at any point in my life, but I think back over my really the last 20 years in aviation specifically, and I think I remember very clearly being in that Cessna 172 and doing a run up at the end of the whole day, watching these airplanes, airliners taxi by, and just dreaming of the day when I could be sitting in that airline cockpit. And then I get there, and then I'm dreaming about the day when I get to be an airline captain, and then I want to be a standards captain, and the bar keeps elevating, right? And I think that's fine, but it has to be for the right reasons. As I've gotten into these different levels of leadership and levels of responsibility, I do question, am I doing this for the right reasons? Because, obviously the volume continues to ratchet up, and there becomes more pressure, there becomes more responsibility, and it's very difficult, but am I doing it for the right reasons? So I think personally, for me, it means ultimately, am I contributing? Am I providing value? Am I living aligned with my core values? And am I enjoying what I do? And if I can say yes to all of those, you're going to wane a little bit back and forth. I mean, some days my job's hard and maybe it diverges a bit from my core values. I can't exercise as much. I can't get out and play hockey, or I can't do those things that I want to do. But recognizing in general, if I can do those things consistently, I'm probably in a pretty good spot as far as success goes.
Absolutely. Speaking of, you had mentioned seeds earlier, and I really love that.
Yeah.
Do you have any other perhaps strategies or tips for anybody looking to get into leadership or even aviation?
Yeah, you know what? I think getting into leadership or aviation, really, as far as tips go or any sort of strategy or advice, for me, I think it really just comes down to having the right mindset, right? And I think that there's a lot of things you can do through your life that are going to set you up for success and serve you well. The first of all, first one being just be curious, right? And I think being curious is going to serve you in so many different ways. First of all, it's going to teach you how to be a good critical thinker. It's going to teach you how to challenge the status quo and maybe try and take other perspective and learn from others. And I think that's so important. Challenge yourself, right? I mean, obviously, do the homework, make sure you work hard, and try and allocate time to your profession, whether that's being a line pilot, whether that's being an executive. Focus on learning more like leadership lessons, focus on understanding your business and the metrics of your business, and try and be really capable from a credibility, but also from a technical perspective. And really just generally be positive, I think. And I think the last thing I wanted to say is empathy. I think empathy carries so much relevance especially in a leadership role. As without empathy, you can't really truly understand what that person that you're leading or somebody that you're working with is going through. And if you have that, you both learn from it, and you can both be better from it.
Mm, I love that. I always say lead with empathy, act with curiosity. So
Love it.
it sounds
Yeah,
like we're both aligned there.
I think so.
One thing I'm sure the listeners are curious about is maybe what's a common myth about your industry, aviation, that you wish would be debunked?
A common myth. Well, let's see. Um, I think really let's expand that out a little bit. Maybe if you don't mind, we'll expand it out to just in general, like leading. And I think probably for me, it really comes down to what I've learned is you have to play to your strengths is probably the biggest piece of advice there. And I think there's probably a couple things. So the first one is just you don't have to be really smart to be successful. And that maybe seems like a weird thing to say, but I think that when I've looked at my mentors and I've looked at the people I've worked with over the years, and I'm standing on, watch them work and how they articulate themselves and articulate challenges and problem solve and solution. And I do think, man, I could never be that person. But as I've gone through leadership, these opportunities still keep coming to me. I'm going, well, I must be doing something right. So ultimately, what it comes down to is it's just really understanding where your strengths are. And for me, it's relationship, it's collaboration, and it's curiosity, right? And I think those things serve you well. And for me, the second piece is really the myth is probably around work-life balance. We hear this so often, and I think that we're constantly challenged by it. And the reality is, what are you? And I remember I heard an Adam Grant podcast one talking about work-life balance, and some really good advice on there is understand first of all what it is you are. So for me, from a personality perspective, are you an integrator or are you a segmenter? And I consider myself an integrator in the fact that I love my work and I love my work being interlaced in part of my everyday activity. So I don't need to have clear boundaries between my work and personal life. It actually fills my bucket and fulfills me. The challenge, of course, being how am I honoring my family and how am I taking the time to do what I value and what matters to me while being integrated with my work. So that's the ongoing challenge of living true to your values. But I think there is those moments where you just unplug and you put the phone down and give yourself to others or give yourself to that activity that you like to do and realize the world's not going to come crashing down around you and be stopping on a dime if you're off the grid for an hour or something, right? So really, I think it comes down to those two things. Just play to your strengths and really figure out, how you work best with work and find that you live aligned with your values.
I love that. Work life integration
Hmm.
is something I'm very passionate about. But you had mentioned curiosity. I'd love to know what you're curious about right now.
Hmm. Well, yeah, I probably, I mean, most pressing for me would be just really probably the worldwide economy. I mean, obviously being in the airline industry, we're very reliant upon travel demand, people getting in the back of airplanes and going on vacation. So, it is interesting to me when I think back to the days of the heydays of well, maybe it's not heydays, but the days of super high interest rates, and then people were losing their houses because of 14% interest rates. And we see what's going on in the worldwide space now because of the war in Ukraine, because of COVID, the personal spending rates being so high, and then or saving rates being so high, I should say, and this driving this rampant inflation. And now the higher interest rates to try and get that under control. I'm curious about how that's going to play out on a greater space in our society, because we do see people have become accustomed to cheap money and just living um, with these consumers' lifestyles. And I've been every bit as guilty of it myself. But it's going to definitely drive I would imagine, a very large change on how we live our lives here going forward. So I'm curious about it. I'm mindful that I'm hopeful it doesn't have too big of an impact on airline travel, because obviously that would impact my job and my life personally. But that's probably what I'm most interested in right now, is seeing how that plays out. And I see the Bank of Canada today raised interest rates again. So
Yes. Yeah. um, One thing I want to ask before we jump off here, I have a couple more questions.
sure.
Is what's maybe something you're proud of that we haven't touched on in interviews so far?
Well, what am I proud of? Gosh, I mean, I'm proud of my family. I'm proud of the opportunities I've been given. Geez, I guess I'll just go back to time goes quick, and you do your best. We're all well intentioned, and you work hard. And I certainly never take anything for granted. I don't ever feel like anything's afforded to me or allotted to me. I just really feel like you should earn everything in life, and show up positive and show up well. And I'm proud of the way things have worked out with my career. And I'm really proud of the team that I lead. I think that one of the things that I found in my time at Swoop and my time previous to that is in leadership roles at WestJet is just, if you show up for the people that you work with and you care as greatly about them as you care about yourself, magic will happen. And I've just seen some people really flourish under my leadership, and it's just because I trust them and I give them the opportunity to do so. And then in turn, I flourish because they help show me how to lead, and they help show me how to be a better person as well. So yeah, probably that's the thing I'm most proud of, I guess, outside of my family.
I love that. Just going back to that, leading with empathy, just filling the bucket of those around you. That's fills my bucket. So,
Yeah, certainly.
where can our listeners connect with you online?
Yeah, so I am on LinkedIn, and I don't really look at Facebook very much. I'm pretty busy and just don't really connect on it all that much. But probably LinkedIn and be the best place to go to. I think.
Awesome. I'll put those links in the show notes, guys. So go reach out. It's been a pleasure having you on the podcast, JD. I have one last question for you. So my last question to you, JD, is what does being a leader or leadership mean to you?
Yeah, so thank you, Joe. This question is one that I think a lot about, and really, as mentioned earlier, I think it's important that you really align with your value set as close as possible. And relationship is big for me, and that's prevalent in my leadership style. And really, I always try to start with that connection first. Ultimately, leadership really means taking all the blame, giving away all the credit, and really just trying to use any influence you have to support and enable your team's success. And it's not easy. In fact, it's being a good leader is really hard, right? Because you have to make those hard decisions. Sometimes it's support the business and don't necessarily support the people, the team. And you really need to also be prepared to challenge the team and have those courageous conversations where you need to. And you really need to lead by example and be open to feedback, because we're all still learning. Simon Sinek, I think, said it best with his line that leadership really takes you from a position of being responsible for the work to being responsible for those that do the work, right? So that's definitely been a mind shift for me. And I guess really, as I've said, just be curious, lead with empathy, and start with relationship. And from there, you likely just can't go wrong. Hi, I'm Jimmy Dean Porter, and you're listening to Joe Momoh Presents.
Thanks again for watching the Joe Momoh Presents podcast. For more episodes, check out joemomo.com/podcasts. All right, see you next time.